Hello guys, and welcome back to Sleepless Tales. If you're a fan of the channel, you'd have noticed that the posting of this series, Demian, and the previous series, Heart of Darkness, there was a humongous gap in between these. This was because, between working on this part of Demian and the previous part, I took a 1-month gap. At the beginning because I was going on vacation, and then because I was very sick, so it's been, haven't been able to work on these in a while, but I'm excited to start getting into them again. Anyways, continuing on Demian, we're on Chapter 4, Beatrice. This is Sleepless Tales, as always, and thank you for joining me. Don't forget to like, comment, favorite, subscribe, and let's get started with the reading. Chapter 4, Beatrice. Without having seen my friend again, I went to St. Blank, Blank being, the name of the school, and he went to after my holidays were over. My parents accompanied me, and with every possible solicitude for my welfare, entrusted me to the great care of a master at the grammar school who was in charge of a boarding house. They would have been frozen with horror if they had realized into what sort of world they were introducing me. The question is ever as whether, given a time, God-fearing son and useful citizen could be made out of me, or whether my temperament would lead me astray. My last attempt to be happy in the shadow of my father's house and ambience had lasted quite a long time, and at intervals had been almost successful. But finally, it failed utterly. The unaccountable emptiness and abandonment which began to feel during the holidays after my confirmation, and how familiar I was become with that thin, desolate atmosphere later, was slow to leave me. My departure from home was not too much of an ordeal. I felt ashamed that I did not feel more homesick. My sisters wept for no reason, but I could not weep. I was surprised at myself. I'd always been a sensitive and essentially good child. Now, I'd completely changed. I had acquired an attitude of indifference towards the outside world, and for days on end I was preoccupied with inner voices and the dark, forbidden streams which ran below the surface. I had grown up very rapidly in the previous 6 months, and now gazed onto the world, lean, overgrown, and unprepared. My boyish charm had vanished. I even felt that it was impossible for anyone to love me, and I was out of love with myself. I often felt a great longing for Demian, but no less often I hated him, holding him responsible for the impoverishment of my life, which I was dragging round with me like a foul disease. At first, I was neither liked nor respected in our boarding house. I was ragged to begin with, then avoided and regarded as a hypocrite and a disagreeable odd man out. I fell in with the part and even exaggerated it, and grumbled myself into a kind of withdrawnness, which the outsider must have taken for masculine cynicism, whereas, if the truth were told, I often succumbed to fits of gnawing melancholy and despair. In school, I had to subsist on scraps of knowledge that had accumulated in my days at home since the class was somewhat less advanced than my previous one, and I got used to regarding my fellow pupils rather contemptuously as children. It went on like this for a whole year and more. Even the first holiday periods at home did not strike any new note, and I was quite relieved to return to school again. It was the beginning of November. During the weather, typical of that season, I had formed the habit of going on meditative walks, on which I often enjoyed a kind of ecstasy, tinged with gloom, and cynicism, and self-deprecation. One evening in the damp, foggy twilight, I strode off through the environs of the town. The wide avenue in a public park stood completely deserted and seemed to beckon me to enter. The path lay thick with fallen leaves, which smelt damp and acrid as I shuffled my feet among them with a kind of melancholy delight, and the distant trees loomed huge, shadowy and ghost-like, out of the mist. I stood irresolutely at the end of the avenue, and stared eagerly into the dark foliage and the humid fragrance of death and decay, which awoke, and as if it were, answered some echo within me. How insipid life tasted. A man joined the main drive from a neighboring path, his cape swinging as he walked. I was about to continue on my way when a voice called out, "Oh, hello, Sinclair." He came up to me. It was Alphonse Beck, the oldest boy in the boarding house. I was always glad to see him, and I had nothing against him beyond the fact that he was always sarcastic and avuncular with all the junior boys. He was reputed to be as strong as an ox and have the headmaster completely under his thumb. He was the hero of many legendary schoolboy episodes. "What are you doing here?" he shouted affably in the tone the senior boys assumed when they condescended to one of us occasionally. "Well, I'll bet anything you're writing poetry." "I never thought of it," I replied brusquely, repudiating the notion. He laughed, came closer, and shouted in a way to which I had long ceased to be accustomed. "You don't need to be afraid that I don't understand, Sinclair. There's something about strolling in the evening mists that begets autumn thoughts, and one feels in quite the mood for composing verse. I know. About dying nature, of course. One's lost youth, which is like you. See Heinrich Heine." "What? I'm not as sentimental as that," I objected. "No offense, but in this weather, I think it's a good idea to come out some spot where there's a glass of wine, something of that sort to be had. Are you coming along? I'm on my own, or would you rather not? I wouldn't want to lead you astray, old man. You might not want to risk getting a black mark." Within a short time, we were sitting together in a small pub in the suburbs, drinking a doubtful wine and clinking glasses. I did not take to it at all to begin with, but at any rate, it was something new. Soon, however, unaccustomed to wine, I became very loquacious. It was as if a window in me had been broken, and the world shone in. It had seemed so long, so terribly long, since I had confided anything about my inner self to anyone else. I began to be fanciful, and in the middle of it all I told him about the whole Cain and Abel affair. Beck listened eagerly. Here at last was someone to whom I could give something. He slapped me on the back and called me a devil and a sly rogue, and my heart swelled with ecstasy at this opportunity of releasing my cooped-up longing to speak, communicate, of being recognized and of counting for something with an older boy. When he called me a sly rogue, the words seeped into my soul like a sweet, heady wine. The world glowed in new colors, and thoughts gushed out of me like 100 audacious springs. The fire of enthusiasm burned inside me. We discussed teachers at the school and our school friends, and we seemed to have a perfect understanding of each other. We talked of the Greeks and the pagan world, and Beck was eager to introduce me and to confess my love affairs. But I was out of my depth. I had had no experience, and I had nothing to relate. Moreover, the wine failed to release or enable me to communicate whatever I had felt, built up or imagined. Though I was burning inside, Beck was much more knowledgeable about girls, and I listened to his tales with excitement. I heard amazing things. Things I would not have really thought possible were trotted out as part of everyday life and seemed quite normal. Alphonse Beck had already gained experience of women in his less than 18 years of life. He had learned, for example, that girls were only out for flirtation and attention, which was all very agreeable, but not the real thing. There's more chance of that with mature women. They were much more reasonable. You could talk with Frau Gigelt, who kept a stationer's shop, and a book could not contain all the various goings-on behind her counter. I sat there spellbound and stupefied. Certainly I could never have loved Frau Gigelt, but nevertheless, it was terrific. There seemed to be hidden springs, at least for my seniors, whose existence I had never suspected. It all had a false ring about it, a more ordinary and insignificant flavor than love should have, in my opinion. But at all events, it was life and adventure, and I was sitting next to someone who had actually experienced it, and to whom it seemed a very normal thing. Our conversation had now left the heights, and had lost its magic. Instead of being the bright little fellow, I had sunk to being a mere boy listening to a man. But all the same, as opposed to what my life had been for months on end, it was a cherished and heavenly experience. Furthermore, it was, as I gradually began to realize, forbidden fruit. From our presence there in the pub to the subject of our discussion, all very forbidden. In any case, it smacked of cleverness and rebellion. I remember that night with remarkable clarity. It was late when we started on our way home, by the wan light of the gas lamps in the cold, damp night air. I was drunk for the first time in my life. But far from being an agreeable sensation, it was extremely distressing, and yet even that had a thrill and delightfulness of its own. It was, after all, rebellion, debauchery. It was life and spirit. Beck boldly took charge of me, cursing me hard at the same time for a bloody beginner. Half led, half carried me home. He managed to bundle first me, then himself, through an open hall window. The sober reality to which I painfully awoke after an all too brief drunken sleep was accompanied by an unaccountable depression. I sat up in bed, still wearing my everyday shirt. My clothes and shoes lay strewn round about on the floor and reeked of tobacco and vomit. And between fits of headache, nausea, and a raging thirst, a picture rose before me as I had long ago ceased to look at. I saw my home, father and mother and sisters and the garden. I saw my quiet and familiar bedroom. I saw school, marketplace, and Demian and the confirmation classes. Everything about it was light. It had an aura of brightness. It was all wonderful, righteous, and pure. And everything, as I now realized, that had been mine only yesterday, nay, a few hours before, and was mine for the asking, had at this very hour, this very moment, depraved, cursed as I was, ceased to belong to me, rejected me, and regarded me with disgust. Every act of affection and intimacy which I had experienced in the distant golden gardens of childhood, every kiss from my mother, every Christmas feast, every bright summer morning at home, every flower in the garden was blighted. I had trampled it all down underfoot. And if informers had come up to me and tied me up and led me to the gallows as an outcast and defiler of temples, I would have been ready, gone willingly, considered it just and rightful. This is how I looked inside. I, who was going round despising the world. I, who was proud in spirit and shared Demian's ideas. That was how I appeared to myself, an outcast, swine, drunk and besmirched, a vile beast, brought low by my loathsome appetites. That was how I looked to myself. I, who had left those gardens where everything was pure, bright, and unquestioning affection. I, who had loved the music of Bach and beautiful poetry. And with mixed feelings of emotion and revulsion, I could still hear my own laugh, drunken, uncontrolled, stupid bursts of laughter. That was I. Yet in spite of it all, I almost reveled in my torment. So long had I crawled along, blind and foolish. For so long had my heart cowered, as it were, silent and anemic in a corner, that even this self-reproach, this loathsome feeling was welcome. At least it was emotion of some kind. The fire was kindled and my heart raced. Though utterly routed, I felt something akin to release, and the dawn of spring in the midst of my trouble. Meantime, seen from without, I was rapidly deteriorating. My initial orgy was soon followed by others. A good deal of tippling and time-wasting went on among my schoolfellows. I was one of the youngest among those who misbehaved in this way, and I soon no longer merely tolerated a young'un, but I was a ringleader and star, a notorious and daring pub crawler. I belonged once more to the world of darkness, and to the devil, and in that world I was considered no end of a lad. I lived in an orgasm of self-destruction, and while among my friends I was thought of as a devil-may-care leader, and a devilishly smart and witty fellow. Deep down inside, I was full of fear and anxiety. I remember even now that tears sprang to my eyes when I saw children playing in the street one Sunday afternoon as I emerged from a pub, gay and happy, with their freshly combed hair and Sunday clothes. And while I often amused and shocked my friends with outrageous cynicism at beer-stained tables, In my inmost heart, I was in awe of everything I scoffed at, and lay inwardly weeping on my knees before my soul and my past, with my mother and God. There was a good reason why I was never in harmony with my companions, and remained lonely among them, and suffered because of it. True, I was a drunken hero, and mocker after the toughest heart. I displayed spirit and courage in my thoughts, and words about my teachers, school, and parents, and the church. I listened to smutty stories, and even ventured on an occasional one myself, but I never accompanied my friends when they went out with girls. I kept to myself and was filled with an intense longing for love, a hopeless longing. While, to judge by my talk, I ought to have been a hearted enjoyer of feminine favors. No one was more outrageous, no one more shameless than I. And when occasionally I saw the young girls of the town walking in front of me, pretty, clean, pleasant, innocent, they seemed like a pure, wonderful dream, 1,000 times too good and pure for me. For a time, I could not even bring myself to enter Frau Geld's stationery shop, because it made me blush to look at her, remembering what Alphonse Beck had told me. The more I realized how perpetually lonely and different from the others I was, the less able I was to break away. I cannot now remember whether my drinking and boasting really gave me any satisfaction. I never became used to drinking, to the extent of managing to avoid the disagreeable after effects on each occasion. It was as if I was compelled to do all these things. I did what I had to because I did not know what else to do otherwise. I was afraid of being alone for long and felt nervous when confronted by the many shy and tender impulses which continually attacked me. And I was afraid of the thoughts of love so often surged up in my mind. What I missed above it all was a friend. I had 2 or 3 schoolmates whom I liked to see, but they belonged to the good types, and my vices had long been an open secret. They avoided me. I was considered as a desperate gambler, on the brink of disaster. The teachers knew a good deal about me. I had been severely punished several times, and my final expulsion seemed to be merely a matter of time. As I myself knew, I had long ceased to be considered a model pupil, but I forced myself painfully along, with the feeling that it could not go on like this forever. There are many ways in which Providence can make us feel lonely, and lead us back to ourselves. Sometimes God seemed to accompany me. It was like a bad dream. I see myself as a dreamer, spellbound, restless and tormented, dragging my odious and unclean way over mud and mire, broken beer glasses, and nights filled with cynical chatter. There's the kind of dream in which, on your way to the princess, you get stuck in quagmires, back lanes full of refuse and foul odors. That was how it was with me. In this rough fashion, my loneliness was thrust upon me, and I raised, as it were, between myself and my childhood, a locked gateway to Eden, with its pitilessly resplendent host of witnesses. It was a beginning, an awakening of nostalgia for my former self. I had not got rid of my fear. I still had shivering fits, as on the occasion when, for the first time, alarmed by my housemaster's letters, my father appeared unexpectedly in St. Blank, and came to meet me. When towards the end of that winter he paid me a second visit, I was already hardened and indifferent, and allowed him to scold and entreat me, and remind me of my mother. Finally, he grew angry and said that, unless I approved, he would have me sent away from the school in disgrace and put me in a reformatory. I wished he would. When he went away that time, I pitied him. He'd achieved nothing. He could no longer find a way into my heart, and for the time being, I felt it served him right. I did not care what became of me. In my odd and unattractive way, with my pub visits and outspoken attitude, I was at loggerheads with the world at large, And this was the form my protest took. I was ruining myself in the process, and sometimes it looked to me as if the world could not find a better use for people like myself. If they could offer no better place, no higher rewards, people like me would come to grief. Well, the loss was the world's. The Christmas holidays were a joyless affair that year. My mother got into a panic when she saw me again. I had shot up still more, and my lean face looked gray and wasted. My features had lost their tautness. My eyes were red-rimmed. My incipient mustache and spectacles, which I had recently acquired, made me look odder still. My sister recoiled, giggling. It was all very uncomfortable. My conversation with my father in his study was uncomfortable. Exchanging greetings with a handful of relations was uncomfortable. And above all, Christmas itself was an uncomfortable business. Ever since I had lived in our house, it had been the great day of festivity and love, gratitude and renewal of the bond between myself and my parents. This time, it was merely oppressive and embarrassing. As usual, Father read out the passage about the shepherds abiding in the fields, watching their flocks. And as usual, my sisters stood smiling in front of the table, on which the Christmas gifts had been placed. But my father's voice sounded displeased, and his face looked old and hollow, and Mother was sad, and the atmosphere painful and strained, and presents, Christmas wishes, Bible reading, an illuminated tree. Everything seemed out of place. The gingerbread smelt sweet and evoked a host of agreeable memories. And the Christmas tree with its fragrance reminded me of things as they had been in former days. I longed for Christmas Eve and the holidays to be over. It was like this the whole winter. Only quite recently I had been solemnly warned by the masters at school and threatened with expulsion. It could not go on much longer, as far as I was concerned. I had one special grudge against Max Demian, whom I had not seen now for some time. I had written to him twice at the beginning of my school term in St. Blank, but had received no reply. So, I just not called on him during the holidays. In the same park where, during the autumn, I had met Alphonse Beck, in the early spring, when the hedges were beginning to grow green, I encountered a girl to whom I felt an immediate attraction. I had gone out for a solitary walk, my head filled with unsavory thoughts and worries, for my health had not been good, and to make matters worse, I was in perpetual financial difficulties. I owed sums of money to various friends, and had to keep producing presents by way of bribes. And in several shops, I had allowed bills for cigars and such like to mount up. Not that these anxieties went very deep. If my existence was to come to an end very soon, and I drowned myself, or was transferred to a reformatory, these trifling matters would never arise. But I lived face to face with these ugly facts, and they made me wretched. On that spring day in the park, then, I met a young woman. She was tall and slender, and smartly dressed, and had a boyish face. She attracted me immediately. She belonged to the type I liked, and she began to fill my imagination. True, she was not much older than I, but much more mature. She was elegant, well-formed, already a grown woman, and without a touch of exuberant boyishness in her face, which made a particular appeal to me. So far in my life, I had never managed to approach a girl with whom I was in love, nor did I exceed on the present occasion. But the incident made a deeper impression on me than anything before, and this infatuation had a profound influence on my life. So guys, that's where I'm going to cut it for part 6. You would not believe how long this part took to produce. And by that I mean, I started recording it a month and a half ago, probably now. So I'll give you guys a full vlog breakdown about how my life's falling apart at the end of Demian. So you just hold onto your butts, guys, and I'll see you in part 7 of Demian. All right. You have a great night. Don't forget that I love you, and yeah, good night.